All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for the final presentation of our third day of FinCrime Virtual Week. Huge thanks to RDC for helping to make this entire week possible, and thanks very much to RDC and to Bonnie Liggett, who will be meeting in just a moment for this final session of today. This is Monitoring Marijuana. We're going to be looking at the past, present, and future. And this is a topic of conversation that's come up a couple times. Came up in our Canada session earlier today in regards to marijuana-related businesses. There's obviously been a ton of idea. We're going to be focusing on a U.S. perspective here today, but if you have international questions, we'll do our best to field them too. And on that note, please do ask questions throughout the presentation. You can type your questions into the Q&A. And we'll field questions, a dedicated Q&A at the end. We may be able to field some as they come in, too. We'll also be doing a couple of poll questions during this session, as we do in most sessions. This is one of them. Does your institution provide services to marijuana-related businesses? Yes, we do. Not at this time, but exploring it. Not at this time, not currently exploring it. Never until U.S. law is changed. One of the issues is the discrepancy between federal and state law in the U.S., or not sure. So let's see what kind of results we get there. In the meantime, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Just in case you're not familiar with us, not familiar with who we are, this is your first session of the week. We are the Association of Certified Financial Crime Specialists, ACFCS. We're a professional association that exists to serve you. Professionals who detect and prevent all forms of financial crime, whether that's money laundering, fraud, sanctions, tax evasion, cyber security, whatever it may be. We're the big tent for financial crime detection and prevention. We offer membership. We offer our CFCS Certified Financial Crime Specialist credential, live events, and at some point in the future, live events. But until then, online events as well as online training. So get involved with us, join the association, learn more about us. You can take advantage of discounts as an event attendee. Use the discount code FinCrimeVirtual10. 10% off membership and certification, I think, until the end of the month. Let's see the results of our poll and definitely learn more about everything we have to offer. Thanks again for being here. So actually about 14% said they do provide services to marijuana-related businesses, which is interesting. That's actually a little bit higher than I expected, but the biggest chunk is the no, we're not doing it, or we're definitely not doing it until the law is changed. So that's maybe a little bit more in line with what we expected. So we're going to ask this question again in a slightly different format and see if maybe we change your mind or influence anybody to explore providing services after this presentation, because maybe it's a little bit more feasible to keep an eye on some of the potentially illicit activity than you thought. So this is just a couple of quick notes on logistics. I mentioned this a few times, but if you're not on Goosechase already, definitely encourage you to download the app, Goosechase, from the App Store. Use the game code ACFCS to join. A lot of fun scavenger hunts, missions that you can do, and then we've been giving out prizes throughout the event, and we'll give out some more tomorrow based on who's in the lead completing these little missions to do various things at the event. Definitely visit our sponsors and exhibitors at their exhibit booths, or join a product demo, or all of the above. They're providing a lot of great resources at their virtual exhibit booths, and they've been doing a lot of really substantive and interesting product demos. It's a great chance to see the solutions out in the field. Thanks again to RDC as one of our platinum sponsors. It's been really great that they've sponsored this event because, again, we've been able to bring it to you free of charge. And a lot of people have asked about slide decks, presenter materials, other resources. In order to receive those, you have to opt in. The easiest way to do that is to go to your GRIP profile and go down to exclusive access and say, yes, please send me the follow-up materials. So please do that. That's the way you'll get access to all this stuff. There's a lot of really great resources that have been provided by speakers, by sponsors, and by subject matter experts in that. So please opt in. Again, go to your GRIP profile, scroll down to exclusive access, and say yes. And then finally, please continue the networking and conversation on GRIP, as well as on social media. Use the hashtag FinCrimeVirtualWeek. This is a browser-based platform. If you have any tech issues, please refresh your browser. That usually solves most problems. If you still have issues, close it out, rejoin. Chrome and Firefox generally work best. And in just a second, I'll put up our event support email if you do have ongoing technical issues. With that, I'm very pleased to introduce Bonnie Liggett. She has extensive experience in the content and information industry space, including management and leadership of global staff. She was previously with, I think, Thomson Reuters, which is now Refinitiv. She's worked for Dun and Bradstreet, as well as other well-known names in this industry. She's now the global head of content, Director of Content Acquisition for RDC, where she leads up their content initiatives, including on various areas, including marijuana-related businesses, cryptocurrencies, fraud, and environmental and social responsibility. So, Bonnie, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate it. And this is a topic that is of great interest to our audience. We have a lot of attendees out there. It looks like we already have questions coming in from some eager folks. So thanks so much for being here. And please go ahead and take it away from here.
Great. Thanks so much, Brian. I really am pleased to be part of the conference. And let's get going. So what I wanted to do first was say hello to everybody. Thank you all for joining me and looking at doing business with MRBs, and from the perspective of where we've been, where we are today, and where we might be headed. As we know, some things don't change, that being the federal marijuana laws, still illegal. But state legislation is progressively moving towards legalization of marijuana, and the momentum is building. It's forcing financial institutions to continually reassess and evaluate their risk mitigation strategies, which is why we're here today to talk a little bit about what you might be able to do. So I thought it would be really interesting to go back and take a little bit of a walk through time as to like where cannabis came from. And so starting kind of in the 1900s, and boy, what a long, strange trip it's been. While the use of cannabis has been around for thousands of years, the first time it really became newsworthy was really in the 1930s with Reefer Madness, when marijuana was outlawed with the introduction of the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937. By the 1960s, we saw the rise of the counterculture, and they embraced the use of cannabis. But by the 70s, the tide started to turn again, and with the introduction of the Controlled Substance Act and the Just Say No programs in the 1980s, things started to be very restrictive. So with no change in the federal, from the federal government on the horizon, the states in the 1990s started to move individually to pass their own laws to allow legal medical use. This progression continued through the 2010s as the first states started to move to legalizing adult use, that being Colorado and Washington. There was a whole lots of news around that. I'm sure everybody remembers. There was even guidance in the form of the Cole Memo to help create sort of a hands-off policy for banks to be able to do business with the medical marijuana businesses. But the tide turned again in 2018 as the Cole Memo was rescinded, increasing risk for financial institutions to do business with MRBs. All the while, we watched our neighbors to the north become the second country to legalize adult use overall. Another dimension of the cannabis industry that's been developing over the last few years is industrial hemp, and I kind of wanted to bring this up because it'll be a theme a little bit throughout what I'm talking about. Hemp is one of the oldest domesticated crops in the world, and it's been used for paper, textiles, all kinds of things, basically back as far as 8000 BC. And as noted in the timeline in the 1930s, with the introduction of the Marijuana Tax Act, which really strictly regulated the cultivation and sale of cannabis, it included hemp. So it really didn't try to make a distinction between the marijuana and the hemp. And then with cannabis being added to the Controlled Substance Act of 1970, it was also classified along with cannabis. This didn't really help the industry sort of shake the misconception that hemp and cannabis were the same, because in fact they're two different species. Hemp being the cannabis with less than 0.3 THC, the psychoactive part. Fast forward to 2014 and the 2014 Farm Bill, which finally started putting some definition and distance between the two plants, defining hemp and the industrial hemp as distinct from marijuana. The 2014 Farm Bill authorized higher education institutions and state ag departments the ability to regulate and conduct research and develop pilot programs. There were 33 states, including Puerto Rico, that had pro-legislation. The conflicting changing laws have left the financial institutions kind of trapped between their mission to serve their community and the threat of federal enforcement, forcing financial institutions to kind of prove what the provenance of the deposits for MRBs and ensuring that they're not breaching any kind of regulatory obligations, and that they don't end up being accused of being involved in money laundering, and also then risking their reputations. I think I went one too far. Sorry about that. So I know I'm having to do all of my own things right here. So okay. So let's back to this. So where does that leave us? With lots of information to gather, monitor, and sift through, and no help or guidance from the federal government, the alternative seemed basically the same, whether you wanted to do business with them or not. And most financial institutions, because of the cost of implementing AML and KYC programs, and really the fear of law enforcement and the unknown, really have chosen not to do business with MRBs. So, but it's not all bad news. Times are changing. While we think that nothing has really happened, there's actually plenty of things that are changing. Even in the last couple of years, we really see that public sentiment is changing. The gap between those that believe marijuana should be outlawed versus those that are pro-legalization is really widening, really in favor of the pro-legalization. And in fact, last year we saw some really positive movement in the House of Representatives, which they passed the Secure and Fair Enforcement Act, Banking Act, really SAFE, which approved along bipartisan lines, which is hard to do, and it was sent to the Senate for review and vote. While it's been languishing there, there's still been a lot of very vocal voices who are really pushing to pass the bill. Banking associations from 49 states and Puerto Rico sent a letter on March 6, 2020 to the chairman and ranking member of the Senate Banking Committee, asking to advance the bill protecting financial institutions that lend money to state legal marijuana companies.
And Bonnie, just on that note with SAFE, SAFE was it was something that everybody from John Boehner to Democratic senators and politicians got on board with, right? How much of an impact has it actually had, though? I mean, I imagine this is something we'll cover, but from a banking perspective, from a financial services perspective, has it really kind of moved the needle in the direction of comfort with providing services to marijuana-related businesses? What have you seen in the response to that?
Well, I think I'll talk a little bit about that later on, but we've definitely seen that there's been an increase in the number of financial institutions, especially with the credit unions, who are starting to use, who are starting to service marijuana-related businesses. And so even though the Cole memo was rescinded and the SAFE Bank Act hasn't been passed, I think because of some of the guidance from FinCEN and I think sort of a general acceptance of marijuana, that it's not all bad, has really allowed banks to start really thinking about how do we really service and our local community, because I think that's what a lot of this comes down to.
Yeah. So, and I mean, just a follow-up question on that, because you're totally right that it's been a lot of credit unions that have jumped in first into this space. And, in Colorado, one of the early states to legalize, I think it's, mainly credit unions there that have serviced the industry. Why is that? Why have we seen credit unions take on this, at least perceived very high risk industry before, some of the other institutions that are maybe, at least theoretically, have bigger staffs and more, AML folks, and might be more willing, might have a bigger risk appetite even. So what is it about credit unions that have made them jump into the marijuana space?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is their charters are just very different in terms of the way they're treated by, or would be treated by law enforcement. So I think while they still have to monitor and manage their risk, and even from a reputational standpoint, the larger banks, I think, just have more to lose. So.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Credit unions tend to be very, also very community oriented as well.
Yeah, and I think from a due diligence perspective, which a lot of this comes down to due diligence and knowing the marijuana related business, right? And having that level of trust in who's behind it. It might be that credit unions are maybe in some cases better placed to know the community, right? Than a large financial institution. So they would have that level of comfort. That this person is in fact a legitimate, entrepreneur versus someone who is maybe, coming from the illicit side and is now just trying to get in on the illicit side type of thing. So
I think that's really true, which is a great segue into like sort of the point I wanted to make next, which is, one of the things that I saw, and others that look at this industry can see that the sentiment really changing. One of the things that happened and during COVID is that marijuana-related businesses that are servicing, those dispensaries that are servicing for their patients for medical use, were deemed essential services, and therefore they were allowed to remain open so that they could continue to service the medical needs of their local community all the way through the pandemic. And well, I mean, not that we're done with it, sorry, but during the pandemic. And it's also one of the other things, it's accelerated sort of the adoption of technologies for contactless and mobile payment technologies and so on. So, which may help move the needle, like you were saying, when it comes to marijuana cash dependencies, which is one of the things that's happened because of the federal laws. So it really is very interesting.
Yeah, great points. And one of our attendees was actually noting that, dispensaries are now using cashless, so-called cashless ATMs where, you can use debit cards, their debit card transactions, you're not handling cash type of thing. So, I think it's an interesting evolution there.
Definitely. So anyways, but, so more good news. As of August 2020, we've got only 3 states left and 1 territory that really continues to classify marijuana use as illegal. And that would be Idaho, Nebraska, South Dakota, and the Americas Samoa. Most states have developed some form of legalized medical use, and 14, and that includes territories and DC, are now legal for recreational use. But however, without federal guidance, each state and territory is really having to find their own way, determining how to do their licensing, creating 52, states and territories, having to manage numerous points of contact within each of the states. So it depends on what departments might be used for licensing in that state. For instance, it could be the Department of Agriculture, the Liquor Licensing Bureau, or even the Attorney General's office. So each state is different, making it just a bit complex and frankly, just time consuming for banks to be able to manage all of that. But then also, let's not forget that our neighbors to the north, with Canada being fully licensed as recreational use, if your banks are near any of the borders, you may also be interested in monitoring the 10 provinces, as each of those also has their own distinct way of licensing. Some of the provinces have taken on that responsibility themselves, opening online retail shops for marijuana and taking care of all the licensing, while others are using maybe the liquor board or just privately run businesses. So again, even though it's recreational throughout the whole country, even the provinces are showing that they have different ways of doing the business. So I did want to bring us back a little bit to the hemp again, because this keeps kind of popping up as something that is a bit confusing at times. So under the 2018 Farm Bill, which was signed to remove hemp from the controlled substance list and would then consider it an agriculture product, the state and Indian tribes that wanted to serve as primary regulators must now license themselves with the USDA. So under the 2014, there were certain rules and regulations to opening up the pilot programs, and the states either have to manage their 2014 use under that Farm Bill, and then either grow those plans and get those approved by the USDA, and then that has to be done during the 2020 growing season. So basically by this fall. Some states have opted not to do that, while other states have decided that they're going to produce full-blown plans, have those approved by the USDA in time for the 2020 growing season. So because of the broadening use of the hemp, specifically any kind of hemp-derived CBD products that we see popping up all over the place, the industry seems to be ready to expand, maybe upwards to $2.5 billion by 2020. Right now, it's sitting around $1.8 billion. I think I keep skipping something. Okay. So even though hemp has been removed, oh, sorry. You know, I keep thinking I'm skipping one of my slides, and I think I got them just slightly out of order, Brian. Sorry about that.
No worries.
So even though the hemp has been removed from the Substance 1 list, producers still need to be licensed. So as I was mentioning, it's important to note that that the federal law in this case allows the USDA to license any of the states that want to produce industrial marijuana, produce marijuana. And basically, it'll set a floor for hemp regulations. And at the state level, the states can still set more stringent standards for their local markets if they deem that it's appropriate. So banks will need to be aware potentially for differing legal standards of hemp cultivation and production in their own state as well as state to state. Following the USDA regulations is critical and important for financial institutions to understand why. And I did a little bit of digging to really understand. And the challenge is really being that the growers have to ensure that their concentration levels of the hemp crop is within the established 0.3% THC or less, and that during any kind of growing season, the effects of sunlight, rain, and other kind of growing conditions can cause the THC level in the plant to fluctuate, something that might exceed the statutory concentration levels. So if a producer is following the USD regulations and the testing processes by virtue of the fact that they've got the approved plan, banks can have a much higher confidence level that the producers are properly monitoring, and that lowers the risk of law enforcement and money laundering claims by doing business with these producers. So knowing who is a 2014 versus a 2018 producer, what rules that they're following is really important. So it's really important to note that the regulatory framework surrounding industrial hemp, is still being settled. So it's changing, just like the states are, and will require a certain amount of vigilance on the part of the compliance officers to know that what the risk might be and how to potentially mitigate them over time. So I want to switch gears just a little bit and talk some more about sort of the effect of a lot of these changes as the markets open up and there's challenges and what new challenges might be coming for the industry here today. So supply chain supporting the MRBs is starting to really broaden and diversify. Depending on state licensing and growing laws, dispensaries may have the opportunity now to become growers or to be allowed to transport their harvest to manufacturers and basically build out their own supply chain, sort of creating sort of the economies of efficiencies, as well as basically potentially coming up with new businesses, things like production disposal. So knowing your customer takes on a new meaning. When you need to require additional in-depth reviews, you should be asking lots of questions, not only about their current businesses, but what their future plans might be. So companies
and just on that supply chain,
yeah.
Sorry, yeah, on that supply chain point, because it's an interesting one. Are there? So one of our attendees is wondering, their point is basically like there's been rapid growth in this industry, limited oversight at times. Where do you see the highest chances of, where do you see the highest risks in this field? And specifically, one of the issues I've heard in other conversations about this is sort of like the presence of the black market in the supply chain. Is there risk of, of people who are formerly doing this illegally moving into this as a legal space, but still, retaining some level of illegal operations, or, running a legal dispensary in the front and selling a legal product in the back, that type of thing. So are those risks that, you've seen out there or seeing out there, and how do you kind of get a handle on supply chain risk?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to vary by state depending on how the state is viewing enforcement, and whether they have something like with California, Colorado, Washington, they have thousands of dispensaries. So the risk obviously could be higher that they're maybe doing some of their growing in the back. However, I think the majority of MRBs aren't looking to try and, they've got enough issue with not being able to bank, having a lot of scrutiny, having, licenses, even though the licensing is different state by state. I think there's a lot of on-site visits that are included and things like that. So I haven't seen that as a huge problem. And I think also one of the things that banks can certainly do is when they're screening, if there's adverse media that also comes up about a marijuana-related business, it would probably make the news. And so that information may also be part of their screening. So that can give them another level of comfort that at least that business is clean. that they're looking at as well.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes sense. And one of our question from another of our attendees here, and I think the answer is probably no, but I'm interested to hear what you have to say. Can a marijuana business transport across state lines? Like, could you transport marijuana from one state to another state, assuming it's legal in both states?
Well, I think the answer is yes and no. It depends on the state, which is why this is always so complicated. But you've got, now here's a perfect example in talking about sort of supply chain diversification. And so not just within a state, but across state lines. A company like Curaleaf, for instance, is a really great example of a national brand who has dispensaries located from Massachusetts to Arizona. In fact, they operate in 23 states. They're with 22 cultivation sites and 30 processing sites. So obviously, there is some cross-pollination going on with their business. However, it's going to vary state by state, and it may be that the majority of the cultivation is still done within a state. As I said, they operate in 23 states, but there's 22 cultivation sites. So, and all of those businesses have to be licensed, properly licensed within those states. So they can't operate in one state, have a business in another, and not be properly licensed. So I think the answer is, majority of it is no, they have to keep things in their own state. But there are some cases, I believe, that a company, if they're licensed properly, can transport. Does that answer?
Great, thank you.
Question?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, a lot of the answers to these, these questions are it's complicated, and I think that's one of the major themes here is that it's hard to navigate this because it is so state by state. So right. One more question, and then I'll
yeah.
So go ahead.
Oh yeah, no. I was going to say, I mean, things are always changing. Is why this is so complicated. I mean, Colorado is looking for that home delivery, and just like you can order a pizza. So there's all kinds of aspects of this business that are changing all the time.
Yeah, definitely. And so one more question from an attendee, or really comment, but they're noting that often marijuana-related businesses are processing payments, processing transactions under a different business name for their ACH processing, as processors will not allow marijuana businesses or will shut them down if found out. Is that something that you've heard about, seen as sort of operating under another business name or another personal account or that type of thing to avoid getting shut down? Not necessarily because they're doing anything wrong, just because of the
right.
the risk appetite makes it really difficult for them to find an account.
Right. I think the answer is yes. And I think some of it is just done out of need to be able to bank. But one of the things that we do, I would encourage, a due diligence program is to not just look at the name that they're doing business as, their brick and mortar, but you need to understand what the legal business name might be, the doing business name, but also who are the owners. If there is a line of sight to that information, I know that a lot of companies will collect that information, and it's not readily available publicly, but you can find owners' information through the application processes, because a lot of those applications are publicly available online. The states make them so that people have the opportunity, I think, to look and see, what is being licensed. On the other hand, a lot of those names, depending on the state, can be redacted because they feel that that's, data privacy issues. So where available and where that who's the owner, the stakeholders, who's the senior management of the broader company, I would always encourage to do screening on all of those pieces.
Great points. Thank you for that. Yeah, please proceed.
Oh, no problem. So actually, we'll just skip over here. So this kind of goes back to a question that you had asked before about, the banks are starting very slowly to begin doing business with the different MRBs. And so over the last couple of years, we've seen that there's been an increase of banks doing business, but we've also seen that in the number of SARs, so suspicious activity reports that are being filed. Those are increasing, which is basically, I'm assuming, due to financial institutions conducting themselves, by FinCEN guidance and filing any SARs where they are choosing to do business with a marijuana-related service, and which is great. So we just hope that we see these things continue, and that you see the correlation between following any guidance that may be out there, as well as it starting to service your community. So what else can banks do today? Really, what banks are really trying to do is arm themselves to ensure that they are ready for any kind of, law. They don't get involved with any kind of law enforcement, as well as, really manage their risk. So really knowing your laws in your state and what are the pending legislation is something that, we really encourage. Develop strong due diligence programs that include things like, as I was saying, screening and other kind of transactional technologies in automation that look at, is there any strange movement within bank accounts, large sums in, maybe not on a regular basis, if you're doing business with them, or is depositing money, So develop local relationships with those businesses is another way to help potentially identify bad MRBs, and as well as get a comfort level for the ones that are just trying to do their business and are kind of caught in this quandary. And of course, as the federal government gets more aggressive, and if you are doing business, you really just understand how you can kind of extract yourself and be able to identify those businesses that you may need to talk with a regulator about. But so that's kind of like for the today, but I also wanted to talk a little bit about, where are we going tomorrow? And really, what do we kind of see that the trends in globalization and diversification going to be going forward? So I touched on a few things with diversification early on in terms of sort of supply chain build out and so on. But this is really diversification as it sort of relates to globalization. And, what drives globalization and diversification, which comes first? And I think the answer is they both drive each other. So legalization is growing not just in the U.S. but outside the U.S. And there's countries that are really first to the global marketplace are those that can really create sustainable advantages. So you see companies who are really starting to sort of position themselves for the day when other countries start making it a legal business. And in fact, we talked a bit about sort of that local diversification. This is really just sort of to highlight that there's a larger diversification going on where companies are getting ready for the day when cannabis is like really as common as a beer. And with investments being made in all aspects of the business, whether it's product development, brand recognition, supply chain, sort of control and distribution, looking for the economies of scale and global reach, and just saying, getting ready for sort of that next generation. And
on that note on cannabis and beer, I think there is actually cannabis infused beer. Is that correct?
Yes, there is. I think Anheuser-Busch bought a Canadian beverage company, and they've been working on some cannabis beverages. So I think that as soon as the markets really start to open up, you're going to see a lot of these things start really emerging very quickly.
Yeah, it should be interesting.
Yeah. So, and to that point, already you're seeing the cannabis or CBDs being used in a much more sort of evolutionary, innovative, sort of inspirational way, and not just in flower, or something that you smoke. It's really becoming part of some really large industries. So beverages are really big, health and beauty aids, animal products are just some, and hemp products are exploding. And they can really be found in sort of the thousands of commercial and retail and industrial products out there, including everything from like rope and textiles, clothing, shoes, food, paper, bioplastics, insulation, biofuels. That's just to name a few. And so this market is really going to continue to just explode over time, which then leads to talking a little bit more about globalization. I always love this picture of sort of the mom and pop shop and sort of going from local to national to global, because I think you're going to see a lot of that happening more and more over the next year. And to a certain extent, I think we're already seeing that with things like I was talking about with like Curaleaf. So Curaleaf having, started out in one state, and now they're up to 23 states. So it continues on. In terms of, taking a look outside the U.S. and just kind of taking a quick look to see, what's going on in other countries, because I think a lot of banks who have international footprints are going to need to start thinking about what countries are legal. Right now, the only two that are fully legal are Uruguay and Canada. However, we know that a number of countries are really looking at coming out of the gate really quickly, hopefully in 2020. Although with the pandemic, I think things have kind of been put on back burners for certain countries. But we're looking at New Zealand as being one of them. The second country is really Mexico is one of really interest, especially for those banks that are down along, the border areas. Mexico introduced a bill last year where adults could cultivate up to 4 plants with the ability to purchase marijuana from a licensed retailer. However, it's not actually legal, but because of, again, sort of the disparity in the way the laws were written, Mexican senators had a draft of legislation that they wanted to push forward, but it was pushed back until September. It's really very, very interesting, actually, because a lot of the senators, the Supreme Court in Mexico, they went in front of the Supreme Court in Mexico, and it was deemed that you couldn't actually arrest somebody for the possession of marijuana. So in essence, it's legal in Mexico. They just haven't made the laws completely consistent with how their enforcement is. The third country that we're looking at also is Luxembourg. But we also are watching the Netherlands, because we know that there's the coffee shops in Amsterdam, as well as Spain, where they have the social clubs, that are, there's almost 800 of them, I think, across Spain. A big predominance of them is in Barcelona, where they have, I think, 200 to 300 of them right there. So, but one of the things that is clear is that this market is huge, and it's not going to go away. And I think that over the next 4 years, you're going to see, it totaling nearly 100, they say just about $104 billion, which is an amazing number. But every year, the forecasts are really outpacing, or the actual numbers are really outpacing the forecasts. So does this really mean there's like increased risk for financial institutions with globalization plus diversification? I think, again, it depends on what area of the business that you're you're looking at. Are you looking local for a local community? Are you looking at a national level, or are you looking at a global level? Really depends also on your risk tolerances. But there's no doubt that the cost of monitoring all of these growing complexities, including not only marijuana related businesses, but drilling down into, like we talked about, the owners, or looking at hemp and how the USDA versus the states are licensing there. All of that is costs money, and is really something that you really have to sort of gauge your own risk tolerances for. But just to give you an idea, that change is really coming over the last year. There's been 975 different cannabis-related bills, either moving through state legislature or the Congress for 2020. 975. So that's a lot, and we expect to be hearing a lot more about this in the future. So, and I think one of the things that I've also said is, it's much closer than you think, between Canada to the north and Mexico to the south, which kind of spills over into our banking communities. We need to be aware of all of those areas as well. So, a few takeaways. I think we've talked a little bit about sort of best practices and things that can be done. We know that the cannabis industry is here to stay and will continue to grow, pun intended, over the coming years. The decision to provide financial services really to any kind of business which involves hemp, marijuana, CBDs, or any other kind of derivative of cannabis is ultimately the decision of each financial institution. And it's really based, like I said, on whatever your risk tolerances might be. Policies and procedures should be updated, providing consistency across your organization. And some of the best practices I think we've highlighted here is really verifying that what's going on in the states. Do you know what the licensing obligations are and how companies are registering? Reviewing any of those applications and related documentation submitted by the businesses, which will help you look for owners. Look at any of the kind of information that is publicly available with documents for applications, pre-approvals, and so on. Being able to develop an understanding of what normal activity looks like in the bank accounts. I think a lot of that is very, very typical AML kind of, is there unusual behavior that we should be monitoring? And does it look like there is more than just a regular business deposits going on? And then really making sure that there's any kind of screening activity that you need to do, that's part of your due diligence program, any kind of technical ways or AI that can be used to really sort of monitor any kind of changes in transactional activity, and of course, filing your SARs. And the last thing is really just making sure that your staff has lots of training and everybody really understands what those policies and procedures are. So I think that's all I really had. I hope that was helpful, and certainly happy to answer any questions.
Bonnie, thank you so much. That was an excellent, wide-ranging primer on marijuana-related businesses, where we're at, and where we're going. We do have a whole bunch of questions. Thank you for giving us some blunt facts so far, and we'll keep going for a few more minutes. So one interesting question from attendee here is tax-related. Are there any tax pitfalls to owning a marijuana-related business? What happens when it comes time for your taxes to come due and you own a dispensary? Given that you're selling an illegal product under federal law, do you just take the money to the IRS, or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, to be perfectly honest, that's what's happening in a lot of states. I was listening to a speech by the governor of Colorado when he was testifying in front of, I think it was when the House was passing the SAFE Act bill. And he was basically saying that there were individuals who were literally taking millions of dollars in duffel bags to the state tax offices, and that's how they were paying. And and unfortunately, the tax offices had to take it just exactly the way it was. So which is very dangerous for those that are walking around with that kind of money, that have that kind of money sitting in their business. So even the companies like the Brinks and so on that come and maybe pick it up, now they're being party to these marijuana related businesses. But yeah, I've heard that duffel bags of cash walking into your tax office and paying it is how some of these businesses are doing it.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was interesting. There's actually we had somebody who got their start in the compliance field. Deidre O'Gorman is her name. She was she worked in financial crime compliance for a financial institution, worked for an institution that banked marijuana-related businesses, and then because of the experience, she actually started her own armored car and logistics firm to provide services to MRBs who needed it because there was such demand there. So another interesting question from an attendee, you talked about the field expanding and the businesses who are in this space, diversifying and that type of thing. So it's not just necessarily like a local dispensary that just sells marijuana. This might be a multinational firm that has marijuana-related business as part of its wider portfolio. So from a risk perspective, what do I do there? If I'm a financial institution, I'm trying to figure out how to treat this customer. Is it, 50% of, do I say, okay, if you do 50% or more of your business in, marijuana activity, I put you in this, high risk category or whatever. I mean, what kind of how do you do what do you do to prepare for this, diversified future, and what kind of considerations are there around that?
Yeah, I think, that you're talking a little bit about beneficial ownership. So, and corporate structures, because, like an Anheuser-Busch and specifically, are you going to flag Anheuser-Busch as a company that you don't want to do business with? So there's certainly ways to combine other information with sort of the regulatory list from the states and look for businesses that are buying other businesses. So if you have some of that beneficial ownership content, right, and you're able to look at what businesses they own that are 50% down, or who that business is, if you're looking upwards, if it's a community business, like say, again, I keep just going back to Curaleaf, right? And the fact that they have all of these different businesses within the states is their licensing. And if they're doing business with the bank should be asking the questions about who the owners are. Are there, not just locally, but are there bigger organizations from a national perspective that need to be reviewed? And then are those national companies actually owned by publicly traded companies? So being able to sort of combine information about the ownership of these organizations along with sort of the bottom-up look of the dispensaries and then who owns them is really what you need to be able to kind of do. It's almost like coming from the top down and the bottom up to see what the ownership is. None of it's straightforward. I mean, again, it's just one of those things where the more information that you have, obviously, the more comfort, the bigger, the more comfort level that you'll have. But you're not going to, frankly, you're not going to cover off every aspect of it. It's always going to be difficult as these large conglomerates start sort of just, positioning themselves and buying up these smaller businesses.
Great. Thank you for that. Another question is, what do you do? Let's say you're at a financial institution and you have a individual who is has a business account for their marijuana-related business, right? But then has a personal account where they're just doing their own banking, right? But the money is presumably from their business that they operate, the marijuana related business. Is there anything related to SAR filing that you need to do or anything on that? I mean, I know that for marijuana related transactions, FinCEN put out some guidance where you're supposed to put marijuana SAR in there, and then there's different categories depending on the type of activity. So how do you treat that type of relationship?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question because I think we get that a lot, which is why it's really important that you know who those owners are. Because yes, I would think that if money is flowing from one account into another, or that there's a steady stream of money coming into that owner's account, then absolutely, I think you have to flag that as money coming from a potentially illicit source. And you may not say, I won't do business with you, but I think you still have to flag it, because the money is coming from a federally illegal source. So unfortunately, for the owners, I know that it's tough, between not the business and their own.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I think it's the only answer we have right now, right?
Right, exactly. And again, I keep going back to it's all based on what the risk tolerances are and what the policies at the bank are.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the time being, keep filing those marijuana limited SARs. I think that's the category you use. Another question, kind of looking ahead point, the future point is kind of what's likely to happen next. Do you foresee any legislation to remove marijuana as a Schedule I drug? Is there anything pending that has any chance of removing this federal law, or is it just going to be continued state action for the foreseeable future?
I think it's the latter. I think we're gonna see the state action. Now, that I was reading, and I don't know whether it was rumor or not, that in one of the bills that I think it's called the HEROES bill, right? That the House passed and is waiting for the Senate. That there was actually a part of that bill that had to do with marijuana and banking, that basically they had lifted the Safe Banking Act words and put it into that. Now, whether it survives that or not, I would say probably not. It wouldn't. And I think with everything that's going on right now, regardless of what administration is in place, going forward, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of movement in the next couple years, but I would hope within 2 years, that at the very least, there can be some relief for the banks. It may not make it legal, our whole country, being able to, have a, go into a dispensary the same way that you can go into a liquor store pretty much in every state. But I think that, hopefully, there are enough people, governors and different other individuals who are supporting the legalization, who are going to continue to push for at least some sort of relief for the banks from being subject to law enforcement. And I think that's where, if anything's going to change, it will be there. So this audience hopefully will be the biggest benefit. But do I see the federal government making this legal anytime soon? I hope they surprise me. I hope they surprise me.
Yeah, they've got a lot on their plate now, so I understand that there's a lot of fish to fry at the moment.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
One more question, that from an attendee that's come in, and I think based on your presentation, I'm hazarding a couple of guesses to this, the answers to this question. But the question is, besides the unique nature of the product they sell, are marijuana-related businesses really any different than any other, higher risk customer? So, I mean, what makes this from a bank perspective, from a risk perspective, what makes this really unique? And it sounds like one of the key considerations is licensing. Like if you're doing due diligence on a marijuana related business, it sounds like you're going to want to ask a lot of questions about licensing. Are they in compliance? Do they have all the licensing they need? But, so what, I mean, from a due diligence, from a risk assessment perspective, what makes this industry unique? What should you be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question because, I mean, there's other businesses, obviously, that have certain risks associated with them. I think the fact that the federal laws really conflict with the state laws. And, and also because the states, each individual state has to come up with their own rules, their processes, and they don't always make it all that clear. I think that's part of what makes this different. I mean, in most other risky businesses, you usually don't have such big conflict between state and federal laws in that way. So I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, I think that's the key piece. Well, thank you so much, Bonnie. We are a few minutes.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this was a real pleasure and a lot of fun. It's a great topic. It's really interesting to talk about, and we had an excellent guide to the world of MRB. So thanks for being here. Thanks again to RDC for putting this together. We're going to close out. This is our last session. Well, actually, not quite the last session of the day. There is an ACFCS membership and certification overview at 4 o'clock. Definitely encourage all of you to join that, learn more about the association and everything we have to offer. But after that, we're done for the day. We are almost concluding day 3. We ended it on a very high note to get one more marijuana pun in there. So
there you go.
Thank you so much. Please fill out the survey at the end of this presentation. Let us know your thoughts and feedback, and see you at the demo or tomorrow morning at the next day, which is our tech day, Tech to the Rescue. So thanks again, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a part of FinCrime Week, and we are signing off. Thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Bye.